Pain, it's a word that can feel like an anchor, pulling us down and making it difficult to see beyond the weight it carries. But here's a truth that we often overlook. This pain, the struggles you feel, did not begin with you. Pain is not always born in the moment it is felt. Much of the pain we carry doesn't originate within our own lives. It comes from further back, from deeper places, from stories we've never personally lived, yet somehow they live through us. This is one of the most profound realizations we can make in our journey toward healing, that the weight we feel today may not entirely be ours, yet we still hold it. When we begin to explore this idea, it opens the door to a more compassionate understanding of ourselves and the forces that shape our lives, our emotional reactions, our fears, our habits of thought. These things are often formed long before we're old enough to consciously choose them. They are shaped by the world we were born into, the people who raised us, and the environment that surrounded us. But beyond that, they are also shaped by the lives of those who came before us. Our parents, our grandparents, generations of individuals whose lives were touched by suffering, war, loss, oppression, and struggle. They carried burdens they could not always process or release. These burdens did not vanish. They were stored in memories, in behaviors, in silences, and sometimes even in the very structure of our family systems. Science is beginning to show what philosophy and psychology have long suspected, that trauma can be inherited. Studies in epigenetics have revealed that intense emotional experiences can alter the expression of genes, meaning the effects of trauma may be passed down biologically. So when we feel sudden anxiety in situations that seemingly don't warrant it, or experience a deep sense of grief without an obvious cause, it's possible we are encountering something far older than our own biography. These inherited patterns can shape our sense of self and reality in powerful ways, often without our conscious awareness. But biology is only one part of the picture. Culture, too, carries pain. We are born into narratives about identity, value, gender, race, power, that influence how we see ourselves and others. These narratives are rarely neutral. They come from centuries of conflict, colonization, migration, and survival. And while we may grow up hearing stories about strength and pride, we also inherit silences, the things our elders could not speak of, the pain they didn't have the tools to process. Those silences are loud. They echo through behaviors and beliefs that feel rigid, through emotional reactions that seem out of proportion, and through the invisible rules we live by without questioning. When we experience suffering in our own lives, we often feel isolated. We think something must be wrong with us, but understanding that this pain may have its roots in a much larger system reframes the story. It helps us understand that our experiences are not personal failures. Instead, they are part of a complex tapestry of human survival. Those who came before us did the best they could with the tools they had. Many of them had no space or language to speak of what they endured. Many of them had to suppress emotion to keep going, and we, as their descendants, have inherited not only their resilience, but also the pain they couldn't address. Acknowledging this isn't about placing blame or becoming victims of the past. It's about honoring the truth. It's about recognizing that healing isn't just a personal journey, it's a collective one. When we see our pain not as isolated but as part of a long historical thread, we can begin to work with it differently. We can bring curiosity instead of shame. We can ask, whose voice is this? When a harsh inner critic speaks, we can wonder, whose fear am I carrying? When we feel immobilized by anxiety, and in doing so, we begin to disentangle ourselves from a pain that never truly belonged to us. Understanding the origins of pain requires us to look inward with honesty and outward with compassion. It asks us to investigate our emotional landscape not just through the lens of our individual lives, but through the stories, traumas, and legacies that shaped the world we entered into. This deeper inquiry becomes the foundation for a more profound kind of healing, one that does not stop with us but ripples backward and forward through time. Pain, in its many forms, doesn't merely belong to the person experiencing it in the present moment. Often, it is a continuation of a story that began long before that person ever arrived. The struggles we face in our lives may feel deeply personal, yet many of them are the result of generational echoes, emotional residues passed down like an invisible inheritance. This is the ripple effect of generational struggles, where pain moves quietly through time, shaping the behaviors, beliefs, and emotional responses of those who come after. When a person undergoes a traumatic experience and is unable to fully process or heal from it, the emotional charge of that experience doesn't just disappear. Instead, it lingers in the body, the mind, and in the relational patterns that person holds with others. If that person becomes a parent, that unprocessed pain often gets woven into how they raise their children. It might appear as overprotectiveness, emotional unavailability, or unexplained anger. The child, not knowing the origin of these behaviors, internalizes them as normal, or worse, as reflections of their own inadequacy. They begin to shape their own identity around pain that didn't start with them. Over time, this pattern repeats. The child becomes an adult, carrying the emotional weight that once belonged to someone else. They may feel sadness they can't explain, anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, or patterns of self-sabotage they can't seem to break. Without awareness, they pass those same unresolved patterns forward to their own relationships, to their own children, and into their communities. And so the ripple continues, not because anyone intends harm, but because no one has been taught to look deeper, to pause, to question where the pain is really coming from. Sometimes the origin of this inherited struggle can be traced to major historical events, wars, colonization, systemic oppression, forced migration, or famine. Entire generations may have been taught to suppress their emotions for the sake of survival. They learned to be silent, to endure, to numb themselves. They didn't speak about what happened, not because it didn't matter, but because it hurt too much, or because the culture around them didn't allow space for emotional expression. And yet, even in silence, the pain finds its way through. It shows up in the way families interact, in what is spoken, and, just as importantly, what is not. These emotional patterns can be incredibly subtle. A family that never discusses emotions may pass down the belief that vulnerability is weakness. A lineage marked by betrayal or loss may foster deep mistrust, even in relationships that haven't experienced those wounds directly. Children absorb this unspoken knowledge without question. It becomes part of how they see the world, even if it doesn't match their direct experiences. They learn to fear what their parents feared, to carry burdens that were never truly theirs. Yet the ripple effect is not only a story of pain, it's a story of resilience. The very fact that people have endured and survived means that strength has also been passed down. Within the same systems that transmit struggle, there is also the transmission of courage, love, and the desire for something better. Every generation holds within it both the weight of what came before and the potential to shift the narrative. But to do that, awareness is key. Recognizing that you are affected by generational patterns does not mean you are doomed to repeat them. It means you've taken the first step toward transformation. When you begin to ask questions about your family's history, about the emotional patterns you notice, about the unspoken tensions, you create space for understanding, That understanding becomes the doorway to healing. It allows you to separate what is truly yours from what was inherited. It allows you to show compassion for those who came before you, not in blind loyalty, but in honest recognition of what they carried and how it affected those who followed. One of the most empowering truths is that you do not have to continue the ripple unexamined. You can become the point at which the wave changes direction, but first you must see the wave clearly. You must be willing to hold the discomfort of inherited pain long enough to understand it, not to dwell in it, but to choose differently. When you do this, you are not just healing yourself, you are altering the emotional and psychological environment for future generations. You are creating a new legacy where pain is not silently passed on, but is recognized, felt, and ultimately released. Inheriting pain does not make us powerless. While we may not be the origin of our suffering, we are the ones living with its effects, and within that experience lies both responsibility and opportunity. Personal responsibility in the face of inherited pain is not about taking the blame for what others did. It is about recognizing that we hold the ability and the choice to begin the healing process. This shift in perspective transforms us from passive recipients of generational struggle into active participants in creating a new path forward. Healing starts with awareness, but it moves forward through action. Once we understand that the pain we carry may have origins outside of our personal life story, we are faced with an important question. What do we do with this knowledge? We can either continue carrying it, unconsciously repeating patterns that were passed to us, or we can take responsibility for how it shapes our behaviors, choices, and relationships. This doesn't mean the journey is easy. In fact, healing inherited pain is one of the most challenging things we can do because it often involves confronting deeply ingrained patterns that feel like part of our identity. But challenge is not a sign that we're failing. It's a sign that we're moving in the right direction. Taking responsibility means choosing to examine our emotional responses instead of reacting blindly. It means recognizing that just because we were raised a certain way or taught certain beliefs doesn't mean we have to accept them as permanent truth. For example, if someone was raised in a family where emotional expression was met with criticism or silence, they may grow up struggling to connect or trust others. But if they begin to ask why vulnerability feels unsafe, and trace that fear back through their family dynamics, they begin to see that it's not a flaw in themselves. It's a survival strategy that was inherited. From there, they can choose to slowly, intentionally respond differently. That choice is where healing begins. It's also important to understand that responsibility is not about isolation. Healing doesn't happen in a vacuum. While we are the ones who must decide to face our pain, we do not have to do it alone. In fact, trying to carry that burden without support often leads to further exhaustion and confusion. Seeking therapy, joining support groups, talking to trusted friends, or even engaging in reflective practices like journaling or meditation can be acts of responsibility. They signal a commitment to understanding oneself more deeply. They are steps taken not out of weakness but out of strength and a desire to grow. When we take responsibility for our healing, we are not only transforming our own lives, we are also changing the future. We stop passing down the same emotional wounds and begin passing down tools for awareness, empathy, and resilience. The moment we decide that the pain ends with us, we become the turning point in a lineage that has perhaps known more silence than truth. Our healing reaches backward, honoring those who didn't have the opportunity to do this work, and it reaches forward, gifting future generations with a different emotional foundation. It's also worth recognizing that personal responsibility doesn't mean rushing the process. Healing is not linear. There will be setbacks, moments of frustration, days when the weight of it all feels too heavy. But even in those moments, the choice to stay present, to return to the work, is itself a victory. Responsibility in this context is not about perfection. It is about commitment, the willingness to keep showing up for yourself and for the parts of your story that still need your care and attention. Every person who chooses to take ownership of their inner world is contributing to a larger movement of collective healing. It may seem like a solitary path at times, but every act of awareness, every step toward emotional clarity, ripples outward. When we begin to heal, we relate to others differently. We become more patient, more compassionate, more willing to listen instead of judge. These qualities transform families, friendships, and communities. And they start with the simple yet powerful decision to take responsibility for our pain, even when it wasn't ours to begin with. This is the paradox of inherited pain. Although we didn't choose it, we are the ones who must choose what comes next. And in that choice, we reclaim our power, not by erasing the past, but by rewriting the future. Awareness is the doorway to transformation. Until we become aware of the source and shape of our pain, we are bound to live under its influence without understanding why. Many people move through life carrying emotional weight that feels personal, but is actually rooted in experiences, beliefs, or patterns passed down through generations. Without awareness, we repeat cycles unconsciously. We feel stuck, reactive, or overwhelmed, not realizing that these feelings may be echoes of something much older. Developing awareness allows us to break free from these inherited loops and begin living with intention rather than reaction. The first step in this journey is observation. Before we can change anything, we must notice it. This means paying attention to our thoughts, emotional triggers, and recurring challenges. It means stepping back from our immediate reactions and asking questions like, why did I respond that way? Or where did that fear come from? This level of self-inquiry takes courage because it often uncovers discomfort. Yet that discomfort is a sign that we are touching something real, something meaningful that has perhaps been hidden or ignored. Awareness also requires us to look beyond the surface of our personal experiences and consider the broader context. Many of the emotional responses we have were shaped by forces we didn't consciously choose. For example, if someone grows up in a household where emotional expression is discouraged, they may internalize the belief that sharing feelings is unsafe or shameful. That belief may go unchallenged for years, influencing how they show up in relationships, how they process loss, and how they care for themselves. But once they become aware of where that belief came from, noticing that it wasn't born from truth but from environment, they gain the power to question it, challenge it, and ultimately change it. Awareness is not about judgment. It's not about blaming ourselves for the ways we've coped or the patterns we've inherited. It's about understanding. When we become aware of the roots of our emotional pain, we gain compassion for ourselves and for those who came before us. We begin to see that our parents, grandparents, and even ancestors were shaped by their own environments, many of which were marked by hardship and limitation. They may have lacked the tools to process trauma or express love in healthy ways. Recognizing this doesn't excuse harm, but it provides context, and that context helps us move from anger or confusion to clarity and choice. One of the most profound aspects of awareness is that it invites us to pause. Instead of reacting immediately when we feel triggered, we can stop and ask, is this feeling mine? Is this moment reminding me of something older? That pause can be the space where transformation begins. In that moment, we are no longer ruled by unconscious habit. We are engaging with our experience consciously. This shift from reaction to reflection allows us to rewrite the script. We no longer have to act out the same old stories. Becoming aware of inherited pain also means being willing to notice patterns that show up across generations. This might involve looking at family history with fresh eyes. Are there patterns of addiction, abandonment, silence, or control? Are there recurring emotional themes like shame, guilt, or fear? Naming these patterns is not an act of disloyalty, it's an act of liberation. When we name what has been hidden or unspoken, we bring it into the light. We take away its power to control us unconsciously. Awareness doesn't require us to have all the answers. In fact, it often begins with questions. It's the willingness to be curious about our own inner life, to wonder why certain behaviors repeat, or why certain emotions feel so strong. This curiosity leads to insight, and insight leads to change. As we become more aware, we gain access to new choices, choices about how to respond, how to relate, and how to care for ourselves. Over time, awareness becomes a practice. It is not something we master once, it is something we return to again and again. It is the ongoing decision to live with our eyes open, to face ourselves honestly, and to explore the inner landscape with patience and compassion. The more we practice awareness, the more clarity we gain, and the more empowered we become to create lives that are not shaped by old pain, but by conscious intention and deep understanding. Healing is not a one-time event, and it is certainly not a straight path. It is a process, sometimes slow, sometimes messy, often non-linear. We often imagine healing as a final destination, a place where we are no longer in pain, no longer triggered, no longer affected by the past. But in truth, healing unfolds in layers. It reveals itself over time, often through repeated experiences that invite us to go deeper. What we think we've resolved may surface again in new forms, not because we have failed, but because healing works in cycles, not straight lines. One of the most important aspects of this process is learning to have patience with ourselves. When pain has been carried for generations, it is unrealistic to expect it to vanish overnight. We are often dealing with deeply embedded patterns, ways of thinking, feeling, and relating that were formed not just in our own lives, but in the lives of those who came before us. These patterns may have served a purpose at one time, offering protection or survival in difficult circumstances. Part of healing is recognizing that, and then gently releasing what no longer serves us. As we begin the work of healing, we may experience periods of clarity and relief followed by setbacks or emotional turbulence. This doesn't mean we are going backward, it means we are deepening the process. Healing often brings buried emotions to the surface, grief that was never mourned, anger that was never expressed, fear that was never named. These emotions can feel overwhelming at times, but they are not signs of weakness. They are signs that the body and mind are releasing what was once too much to hold. It's also important to understand that healing looks different for everyone. Some people process pain through talking, others through movement, creativity, solitude, or connection. There is no single right way to heal, only the path that feels most authentic and sustainable for you. It's not about following someone else's timeline or comparing your progress to another's. Healing asks us to listen inwardly, to trust the rhythm of our own emotional landscape, and to move at the pace our body and heart can manage. One of the key signs of healing is the development of awareness and choice. As we heal, we begin to notice when we are falling into old patterns. We start to recognize the internal voice that comes from pain rather than truth. And slowly, we begin to respond differently. We speak up where we used to stay silent. We set boundaries where we used to overextend. We choose rest over burnout, reflection over reaction. These moments may seem small, but they are milestones, evidence that healing is happening. Throughout this process, there will be times when old pain resurfaces. A smell, a conversation, or a life transition can stir emotions we thought were resolved. But instead of seeing this as failure, we can see it as a new opportunity to hold that pain with greater compassion and insight than we could before. This is the gift of growth. We return to the same emotional terrain, but with a wiser heart. We don't react the same way we once did. We have more tools, more perspective, and more capacity to stay present with what arises. Support is essential during this journey. Healing inherited pain often brings up questions and emotions that are too heavy to hold alone. Therapy, support groups, spiritual practices, and honest conversations with trusted people can create containers where healing feels safer and more manageable. We are not meant to do this work in isolation. Connection doesn't remove the pain, but it reminds us that we are not alone in it, and that makes a profound difference. There may also be unexpected gifts in the healing journey. As we process old pain, we often uncover hidden strength, resilience, creativity, empathy, intuition. These qualities were always part of us, but they were buried beneath the weight of survival. Healing allows them to rise. We begin to live with more authenticity, more alignment, and more peace. We stop performing versions of ourselves that were shaped by fear or inherited expectations. Instead, we begin to live in accordance with who we truly are beneath the layers of pain. Empathy is one of the most powerful tools we possess in the journey of healing inherited pain. When we begin to understand that the people who hurt us were often hurting themselves, we open the door to a deeper kind of compassion, not one that excuses harmful behavior, but one that explains it. This perspective helps us move from judgment to understanding, from bitterness to insight. Empathy allows us to look at generational pain not simply as a personal injustice, but as a legacy of unhealed trauma passed from one soul to the next, often in silence. When we trace our emotional wounds back through the generations, we often find a chain of suffering. A parent who struggled with emotional distance may have learned that from their own parents, who in turn may have been hardened by war, poverty, cultural repression, or their own unacknowledged pain. A caregiver who seemed controlling may have been raised in chaos and saw control as the only path to safety. People don't pass down pain because they want to. They pass it down because they didn't know how to hold it, name it, or heal it. They did what they could with what they knew, and often what they knew was survival, not healing. Empathy invites us to look beyond the surface. It encourages us to ask, what might have happened to this person that shaped them this way? That question doesn't erase the impact of their actions, but it helps us understand the context. This is especially important in family dynamics where emotional wounds can be deeply personal and long-lasting. A father's silence may have felt like abandonment, but with deeper reflection, we might discover that he was raised in a household where emotions were punished, not welcomed. His distance wasn't a rejection. It was a learned survival strategy. Recognizing this doesn't mean the pain disappears, but it does shift the way we carry it. Empathy also softens the inner critic. When we start to understand why others behaved the way they did, we often begin to see how those same patterns live within us. We might recognize moments where we became reactive, withdrawn, or emotionally unavailable, not because we wanted to harm someone, but because we were repeating what was modeled for us. This realization can be painful, but it also brings a powerful sense of clarity. We are not broken. We are human beings shaped by our environments, trying to make sense of the emotional maps we were handed. With empathy, we create space for both accountability and forgiveness. We can hold others responsible for their actions while also understanding the pain that fueled those actions. We can acknowledge the hurt while letting go of the hatred. This is a difficult balance, especially in cases of deep betrayal or abuse, and empathy should never be forced or used to bypass justice. Rather, it should be seen as a tool that allows us to reclaim our emotional freedom. Holding on to resentment can keep us tied to the pain. Empathy allows us to loosen that knot, not for them, but for ourselves. Empathy also becomes a bridge for healing relationships, when it is safe and appropriate to do so. Sometimes conversations with family members can bring new insights. Other times, those conversations may not be possible. In both cases, we can still do the internal work of understanding. We can write letters we don't send, speak truths in therapy, or engage in reflective practices that honor both the pain and the humanity of those involved. This internal process helps us integrate our experiences and stop repeating the same emotional patterns unconsciously. Importantly, empathy is not only for others, it's for ourselves as well. As we uncover layers of inherited pain, we must be gentle with the parts of us that still react in fear, that still feel unworthy, that still struggle to trust. These responses were built over time as defenses against deep emotional wounds. They deserve patience, not punishment. Just as we seek to understand the pain of others, we must offer the same grace to ourselves. We are learning, we are growing. We are doing work that many before us never had the chance or tools to do. Through empathy, we become cycle breakers. We stop seeing ourselves and others as simply good or bad, strong or weak. We start seeing complexity. We recognize that every person holds both wounds and wisdom, and that healing is not about erasing the past, but transforming our relationship to it. By practicing empathy, we contribute not only to our own healing, but to a culture that values understanding over judgment, connection over division, and compassion over control. Choosing to heal from inherited pain is more than a personal act. It is a legacy, defining choice that ripples across time. When we decide to break cycles of trauma, silence, or emotional disconnection, we are not just changing our own lives. We are changing what is possible for future generations. We become the pivot point in a lineage, the ones who looked inward instead of turning away. That choice to heal, even when we didn't create the original wounds, is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. Generational pain often moves quietly through families. It hides in patterns of avoidance, in the words never spoken, in the tension that lingers in a room after a conversation ends. It shows up in how people parent, how they express or suppress emotion, how they manage conflict, how they handle intimacy. Often, no one talks about it because no one knows how. It becomes just the way things are. But the moment one person sees through the fog and says, "This isn't working anymore," a new path becomes possible. That person may be met with resistance. They may be called dramatic, overly sensitive, or rebellious. Breaking a generational pattern often disrupts the emotional status quo. Families may not welcome that disruption, even if it's in service of healing. But even so, the decision to face inherited pain is an act of profound love, not only for oneself, but for those who came before and those who will come after. It says, "This pain stops here. I will not pass it down." When we begin this work, we may not have all the tools. We may make mistakes, feel overwhelmed, or doubt whether we're strong enough to carry the weight. But strength doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly with grief we've ignored for years. Sometimes it's setting a boundary with someone we love, or admitting that we don't yet know how to forgive, but we're willing to try. These are the real markers of generational healing, small acts of courage that compound over time. Children, whether our own or in our extended families or communities, watch us more closely than we realize. They absorb not only what we say, but how we live. When we show them that emotions are safe, that conflict can be handled with respect, that love does not require the sacrifice of the self, we give them emotional blueprints that are more whole and more human. They inherit not just our DNA, but our behaviors, our values, and our energy. When we shift that energy from survival to authenticity, from fear to awareness, we give them the gift of a lighter emotional inheritance. But this work doesn't only impact those who come after us. It also reframes our relationship with the past. When we choose to heal, we often begin to see our ancestors with new eyes. We may feel compassion for the grandmother who was emotionally distant, or the father who never said, "I love you." Not because they didn't care, but because they were shaped by times and traumas that taught them to shut down. We can't go back and change their choices, but we can honor their struggles by choosing a different path forward. That in itself is a way of loving them, by doing what they couldn't, by turning toward what they had to turn away from. This is the quiet power of legacy. It's not about perfection or being remembered as someone who had it all figured out. It's about being remembered as someone who was willing to try, someone who chose healing over avoidance, someone who, despite the odds, decided that they were worth the effort, and that future generations were worth protecting from the same pain. It doesn't take a grand gesture to shift a legacy. Sometimes it just takes one moment of presence, one pause before reacting, one choice to love differently. Healing inherited pain is slow and subtle work, but it is also sacred. Every time we tell the truth, every time we break silence, every time we show up for ourselves with kindness, we are doing more than just healing. We are rewriting history. We are crafting a story where trauma doesn't get the final word, where love becomes conscious, and where the future is built not on fear, but on understanding. This is the legacy we create when we choose to heal, one of courage, compassion, and possibility. And so, healing becomes a way of life. It is not about becoming perfect or reaching some ultimate state of enlightenment. It is about learning how to care for ourselves through each emotional season, how to face discomfort without shutting down, and how to keep showing up for the parts of us that still hurt. Over time, the intensity of the pain softens, the emotional triggers lose their grip, and we learn to carry our stories not as burdens, but as sources of wisdom and growth.